Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to show you guys something really cool that I'm sure you guys are going to appreciate. I want to show you guys how I edit photos for Instagram. Now, these tips that I'm about to show you in this video, these are some of the best tips that you can get for getting the most optimal settings for Instagram, getting your pictures sharp, the quality without degrading the quality of your image and all of that. So I want to show you guys the best settings, some of Instagram's secrets, if you will, that would help you optimize the image and really get that cool effect on Instagram that just makes your pictures pop out a little bit more. So this is an image that I shot of this model day, and I want to walk you guys through how I would normally edit this and export it for Instagram. So let's go ahead and open up the image. I'm using Photoshop. Alright, so the first thing that I'd like to mention is that I shot this image in camera raw. It's very important to shoot in camera raw. If you're new to photography, definitely get into camera raw. Don't shoot JPEGs because when you shoot JPEGs, you're basically letting the camera translate the colors and interpret the colors rather, and export and compress a JPEG image for you. But when you shoot camera raw, you're taking the creative control, so you can really control all of the color information, all the details, the exposure, etc. And you can control that in post-production. So that's what I've done here. Usually when I have the Camera Raw app on Adobe Photoshop opened, really what I just do is just do really slight touches. So in this case, what I might do is just bring down the shadows a little bit, increase the whites ever so slightly. I always like to crush the blacks. I like my blacks black and the whites white. I don't really go too crazy with the clarity, because if you do, that kind of looks like HDR, and I don't personally like that look. Always increase the sharpness. You always increase the sharpness. You can never get your image sharper or sharp enough. So once that's done, again, I don't do too many crazy things here because I do everything in the actual Photoshop app. I'm just gonna go ahead and open this. Okay, so now that I have the image opened, one thing to keep in mind is that when you're looking on Instagram, right, you have Instagram open on your phone, the background layer for Instagram is always white, and that has a different effect when you're looking at the images. It makes the colors translate differently to your naked eye. So here on Photoshop, the background is some kind of dark gray, and obviously the colors are translating differently to me. So what I like to do is I like to change the background color to white, especially since I'm already editing for Instagram. So I already have this preset in here. So now I have a white canvas as my background. So now I can really get into all of the nitty-gritty and the details. So first thing I like to do always is to duplicate the background layer, because you don't want to be working on your original layer. And then I like to zoom in just to take a look to see what I would like to retouch here and there. So luckily for me, this model has really beautiful skin, so there's not a lot of work to be done, maybe with the exception of some minor blemishes here and there, some little pimples here and there. We can just take that off using the spot healing brush. Normally when I do skin retouching, especially if the model's skin is looking kind of harsh, or if there are a lot of uneven texture and details and all of that, what I would normally do is a high frequency separation for my skin retouching. And if you guys click on the little icon for my card, there's a little card icon on the right side of your YouTube player screen. If you click on that, you would see another video that I've created where I walk you guys through how I would normally do my high frequency separation for advanced skin retouching. So for this, like I said, her skin is already looking good to me. So what I'm just going to do is just very minor spot healing fixes here and there, and take that off. Let me zoom in closer so you guys can see what I'm doing. Take that off, so on and so forth. Over there. And when I retouch skin, I don't like to go overboard. I like to keep it really simple, really natural, because I still want the subject to look like a human being and not like a doll. So I like to just keep it very minimal, keep it natural. I don't go too crazy like some other photographers might do. Stuff like the smile line, I like to keep the smile line because that's natural in most people. Once you take this smile line off, then she starts looking like a doll, and that looks kind of artificial to me. So yeah, so I'll just go ahead and just get rid of these tiny little spots where I see them, and you know, that's what I would do for this image as far as skin retouching goes. Now the next thing that I like to do after doing some minor skin retouching is that I like to enhance the image, right? Because I myself, I'm a model, and I know how important it is for models to have nice chisel features that are well lit and all of that. So, you know, Day here, she already has nice cheekbones, but what I want to do is I want to pronounce those cheekbones a little bit more by using a little bit of dodge and burn tricks that I know in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer, and what I'm going to do is use a brush. In this case, I'm going to use a white brush, and I'm just going to brush over wherever I see a highlights in her cheekbones and her, you know, her jaw and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to brush over those areas that I want to pronounce. And then one thing you should do is to change your blend mode to soft light, and then we can just kind of brush over these areas ever so slightly. Reduce my brush size. Okay. And now I'm going to create another layer. Okay, so let's see what that looks like on and off. So as you can already see, what I did just now is already changing the shape of her face and making her cheekbones more pronounced. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to do the opposite of what I just did. So this time I'm going to use a dark brush, and in this case you can just hit X to toggle on the colors there. And I'm going to use a dark brush. Oh, don't forget to change your blend mode to soft lights. And I'm just going to use a dark brush to just brush underneath those highlighted areas. Now, don't worry if this looks too extreme. I'm going to show you how to resolve that in a second. Maybe it's too much. So now when you're doing this, you want to think about this like applying makeup, like you're almost kind of contouring the face. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just basically decrease the opacity by a lot, right? So let's keep it at, I think a 26 looks pretty good to me. Yeah, let's keep it at 26, 27, okay? So now let's zoom out a little bit, and let's see. I'm going to put these two layers in a group. So to do that on a Mac, you can just select both layers and just hit Command G, and that puts them in a group. And let's call this group Enhance. So if we were to turn this on and off, you can see how what I just did just basically, in a way, almost kind of lifted her face, right? It almost kind of lifted her cheekbones, made her face look more structured, more chiseled, and without the enhanced layer, her face looks a little bit more rounder than normal. All right. So that's how I would do some enhancements. Another thing that I like to do is I actually like to sharpen the subject's eyes, because that's very important, because I feel like when you look at portraits, one of the first things that you notice in a portrait is the subject's eyes. So for me, I like to keep those really sharp. So what I would do is I would just use the sharpening tool here, and just brush over her eyes just a little bit. And I would also do the same for the eyebrows. All right. So now if we were to turn that on and off, you can see it makes a big difference. So another thing that I like to do is that I like to whiten the eyes just a little bit. So for that, I like to use the dodge tool and just brush over some of the red areas just ever so slightly. Alright, so now let's toggle that on and off so you guys can see how much more striking her eyes is after those little enhancements. Okay, so now that I've done that, it's always good to check back to see how far you've gone in the progress, because you want to make sure that you're improving the image, not taking away. So I like to just go back to the original just to look at that for a second and then toggle that on and off. Okay, so another step that I like to do is I like to do some coloring, some color correction. And Photoshop actually has a lot of really cool tools under new adjustment layer that you could use, like the color lookup, the color mixer, photo filter. All these are really good. So for instance, I'm just going to show you some of these ones and then show you how what I like to use. So for instance, the photo filter, you just hit OK there. So now this already adds a warm filter, and you can actually scroll down to select other types of filters that you could add to change the look and feel of the image, right? It's almost like applying Instagram filters, if you will. But that's not what I'm trying to do here, so I'm just going to step back and hit the undo. And the next thing I want to show you guys is the color lookup. So with color lookup, these are basically the LUTs that are preset with Photoshop. I personally don't like them very much. I find that they don't necessarily work for most of my images, but you guys can play with them and see how you feel about it, and if it's something that you would like to use, something that fits what you're doing. But yeah, I personally don't use these at all. So anyway, let me just delete this layer. So what I like to use the new adjustment layer, and I like to come down to selective color. Just hit OK on this screen. So now with the selective color, you can actually go down through all these colors in the images and make fine adjustments. So for the red, the opposite of red, if you want to add more red, you have to take away the cyan. So the opposite of red is cyan, so I'm just going to scroll this down just a little bit, and it makes really fine adjustments to the image. Then maybe I can just crush the blacks a little bit more, so that way her skin looks like she has more blood, rather, so she doesn't look as pale. Okay, and then you can come down to the other colors and play with that if you like, and see what that does for you, and if you like those effects. Alright, so now I'm at a place where I feel comfortable with this color that I've created. Let's toggle this on and off just to see the difference. Again, it's very subtle, but you can see her skin tone looks a little bit warmer and more lifelike. So in this, without the color enhance, she looks a little pale, she looks a little bit yellow, which is not her natural skin tone. But once I added the color enhance, she looks more warm, more earthy, because that's the kind of the look I'm going for in this image. So now the next step that I like to do is that I like to crop this image for Instagram, right? So what I would do is that you can just hit the C on your keyboard, and what this does is that it brings up the crop tool, and under the crop tool, actually this is set to ratio by default. So under the crop tool, you can come down to ratio and just manually type 4:5, because the ratio for Instagram is actually 4:5 max, and the max width is 1080 pixels by 1350 pixels. So Photoshop actually has a preset for this already, for a square Instagram photo, for a 4:5 Instagram photo, which is essentially 8:10. So you can just hit that to understand what's your maximum height and width for Instagram, and just crop the image accordingly. So in this case, I'm going to basically crop the image. Oops, did that too soon. Let's try it again. Okay, so I think this frame, it's probably just going to bring this up a little bit, and that frame looks pretty good to me. So I'm just gonna okay that and move on to the next step. All right, so the last step that I like to do before I export this image for Instagram is I like to take this image through one more round of sharpening. So this round of sharpening is really going to help your photos pop out a little bit more on people's Instagram feeds. It's going to make it look very high quality, like there's almost no compression in your image at all. So for that, what I like to do is just, if you're on a Mac, just hit the Command, Option, Shift, and E. And basically what that does is that it creates a new layer with all of the effects that you've already added on the layers below compiled into one layer. So on this new layer, what I like to do is that I like to convert this into a smart object. And then after converting to a smart object, what you want to do is you want to add a filter and do a high pass filter. So usually that's, I believe, in the other, and just go to a high pass. Now let's zoom in here a little bit. Now the goal of this high pass filter is to bring it up to a number where you could just see the outline of the image, right? But you don't want to go too crazy, because if you go too crazy, the photo is extremely sharp and that looks like HDR photography, which I'm not really into. So I think to me about a 1.6 looks good. So I'm just gonna hit OK. And then you want to change your blend mode again. Change this to overlay. So now the image is overlaid. So you can see this looks really sharp right now. And if I was to toggle this on and off, you can see it makes a little bit of a difference. So let me go closer so you guys can hopefully see. So this is off, and that's on. Off and on. Now keep in mind, when you put this on a cell phone, it's gonna look a lot different and even more vibrant, more sharper, more high quality, like there's almost no compression at all. So my very last step is to export this using the best and optimal settings for Instagram, so that way there's almost no compression of your images and it looks really good once people look at it on their feed. So the last step that I like to do is I like to go to File, Export As. So now you want to export this as a JPEG, of course. Sometimes some people like to reduce the quality of the image just to save file size, but I don't like to do that at all. I always like to keep the quality of the image at 100% and instead just reduce the max width and height of the image. So remember I said the max ratio is 4:5 or 1080 by 1350. So I'm just going to change this to 1080, and that, because this is constrained proportions, it automatically adjusts the height for you. Another thing to keep in mind is that you want to make sure that this color space that you're converting to sRGB, because if you don't, Instagram is going to compress your photo and convert it to sRGB for you. But if you already do that on Photoshop, then Instagram is not going to do that, and your image is going to maintain its quality. So once you've done that, you can just export this image. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something new. Drop me a comment if you guys have any questions, or if you have other methods that you've used that you find works, or some other tips and tricks. I always appreciate a thumbs up. I love when you guys do that. It, gets me going. So I appreciate if you can drop me a thumbs up as well in this video. Oh, and finally, if you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe. I make videos like this frequently. If you guys drop me a comment to let me know what kind of videos you like to see, I'll definitely work on those. So I make weekly videos, so feel free to check out some of my other contents as well. I appreciate you guys as always. See you in my next video.